He said it like it was nothing. Like I was asking for a ride to the mall, not the doctor who checks if the lump in my chest is getting bigger or not. Just reschedule, ma. I've got a client call at 11. That was it. No, sorry, no eye contact. He didn't even close the dishwasher door, just turned and walked out, tie half done, phone already back in hand, and one shoe still untied. And I stood there, holding my appointment card in one hand and the spoon I'd been stirring tea with in the other. Let me be clear, I wasn't mad. Not at that moment. I was tired. There's a kind of tired that lives in your bones by the time you're 72. It's not from lifting, not from walking, or climbing stairs, it's from being looked through, like you're just another appliance humming quietly in the background. My name is Antonella Ricci. I used to be someone. I used to run my own flower shop. I could arrange lilies in 5 minutes flat, keep orchids alive through winter, and run a register while answering phones. 3 children, 1 husband, 2 hips I wore out ferrying them through life. I used to make risotto from scratch for Sunday lunch and iron my boys' shirts so they wouldn't get teased for wrinkles at school. Now, I'm someone who asks for things. Can you help with the remote, ma? Did you take your pills today, ma? Did you really put canned tuna in the lasagna? Ma? They speak to me like I'm soft in the head. I'm not. I've just learned silence makes people more comfortable. That morning, the house was too quiet after he left. The dog was at the groomer. The TV wouldn't stop flashing, no signal, so I sat. I sat in the chair by the window with my coat still buttoned, purse in my lap like a forgotten passenger. I watched the neighbor's olive tree sway. I remembered my husband, Nino, always said it looked like an old dancer, stiff, but still trying to be graceful. He died 6 years ago, and I've tried to be both parts of us since. But I'm tired of dancing for people who don't clap anymore. The doctor's appointment wasn't urgent, just a follow-up. But something about the way my son said it, dismissive, careless, knocked the wind from me more than any diagnosis ever could. When Nino was alive, he used to say, "If they ever forget who you are, Tony, remind them, gently, but legally." I remember, I laughed when he said that. Legally. And he'd grin. That's the only language some people understand. At the time, I thought he meant estate planning. But now I think he meant something else. Something deeper. Something about identity. About being seen. I made myself a coffee. Bitter. And overbrewed. And sat back down. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I just stared at the drawer across the room. The one Nino always called the vault. Inside were papers, utility bills, old passports, warranty slips, and one manila envelope he told me never to throw away. I left the coffee half drunk and crossed the room. The drawer creaked open, like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust clung to everything. There it was, thick, slightly warped with humidity. The flap sealed with a single strip of tape, no label, no name, just waiting. I brought it to the table, sat down, and peeled it open. Inside, a will, dated 4 months before Nino passed. My name, Antonella Ricci. On every other line, primary executor, sole property inheritor, full authority over the estate. Every clause underlined, notes in the margins, ask Salvini to file these updates ASAP. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I read the pages twice. My fingers tingled. And then I said something aloud, just once, just to the quiet room. "All right, Nino. I hear you." It was 9:10. My appointment was at 10:30. I wouldn't make it, but that didn't matter anymore. I went to the bedroom, changed into something decent, brushed my flyaways back into a bun, and put on lipstick, the red one I stopped wearing because my daughter once told me it looked too loud. Good. Let it be loud. I grabbed the keys from the hook by the door and held them tight as I walked out. The Fiat is old, a 2007 model that creaks when it starts, but it's mine. The seatbelt sticks. The air conditioning died last year, but it moved when I turned the key. I didn't drive toward the doctor's office. I drove to Salvini & Co., the little building near the hill, with blue shutters and a sign half faded by sun. My husband's lawyer, the man who filed our first mortgage, the man who never called me anything but Signora Ricci, even when I told him to relax. I parked crooked in the gravel lot and sat in the car for a full minute, just breathing. There was no anger in me, no vengeance, only clarity. My son hadn't hit me. He hadn't screamed or cursed, but he'd looked at me like I was an errand, like I was a burden to be delayed, and that is the kind of slap that doesn't bruise, but scars. So I carried the envelope into Salvini's office like it weighed 100 pounds, like it was everything I had left to carry. He looked up from his desk, surprised but not unkind. "Antonella," he said, rising to his feet. "Is everything all right?" I set the envelope down in front of him. "Everything is about to be." Mr. Salvini didn't ask questions. Not at first. He just gestured to the chair across from his desk and waited until I was ready. I sat, not slowly like the old woman they all saw me as, but deliberately, like someone who'd stopped asking permission. "I need to update the will," I said. He nodded. "Is it urgent?" I looked out the window. The sun was high, casting long shadows from the olive trees. I remembered my son's voice, just 90 minutes earlier. "Just reschedule, ma." "Yes," I said. "It's urgent." Salvini pulled the envelope closer and started flipping through the contents. He didn't ask for tea. He didn't offer condolences. And for that, I was grateful. What I needed wasn't sympathy. It was execution. "These papers are still valid," he muttered as he skimmed, dated, notarized, binding. "I want to change the beneficiaries," I said. He paused, pen in hand. "Completely?" "Yes, completely." He looked up. I saw a flicker of surprise, maybe even concern, behind his glasses. But then he nodded and opened a drawer. "Do you have a copy of the originals?" he asked. "No, that's the only one." "That's fine, we'll work from it." He pulled out a fresh packet of forms. I watched as his pen danced across the top sheet, writing my name, the date, the location. He was efficient, careful, and utterly silent, except for the scratch of ink. When he passed me the first draft, I adjusted my reading glasses and scanned every line. It had been years since I'd read something with legal weight. My eyes stung. But I kept going. At the end of the page I saw my son's name, Matteo Ricci, and beside it, a thick black strikeout line drawn by Salvini's pen. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. But something in me settled. "Who would you like to list instead?" he asked gently. I hesitated. My other children hadn't spoken to me in months. One was in Milan, the other in Australia. Matteo was the only one local, the only one I still saw, and that was only when I needed something. Needed. That word burned. Now. "I want it left to someone who sees me," I said softly, "even if they're not blood." Salvini nodded as if he understood. "Do you have a name?" I thought for a moment. There was Sophia, my neighbor's daughter. She brought me bread in the winter, watered my plants when I forgot, asked about my stories, listened, not out of duty, but curiosity. I gave him her name. He didn't question it. As the documents were finalized, I looked around the office. The same dusty bookshelf, the photo of Salvini's old dog, the crucifix above the door. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. When I signed the last page, my hand didn't tremble. "Would you like me to notify anyone?" he asked. "No," I said. "Let them find out the same way I found out I didn't matter." He slid the papers into a fresh folder and still. "Antonella, are you sure?" I looked him straight in the eyes. For the first time in years, we said our goodbyes, and I stepped out into the bright noon sun. The world didn't look different. The street still hummed with bees. The tires of passing cars still crunched over gravel, but I felt different. I felt like someone who had stopped waiting for others to remember her name. Driving back home, I passed Matteo's office. I didn't stop. Instead, I went to the bakery. I bought a cannoli, a real one, with the candied orange and dusting of pistachio. Not the frozen ones they give to tourists. Back home, the house smelled faintly of old coffee and unopened rooms. I kicked off my shoes, unbuttoned my coat, and sat at the kitchen table. My lipstick had faded, and my hair had loosened from the bun, but I felt more put together than I had in years. I ate the cannoli in silence. Slowly. One bite at a time. The ricotta was sweet. The crust perfect. No one texted. No one called. The world, apparently, didn't notice I had rewritten my story that morning. And that's when it hit me. That was the point. For years, I had made my life small so others could feel big. I'd bent to fit their schedules, softened my voice so they could talk over me, hidden my wisdom behind polite smiles. Because that's what they tell you to do when you're old. Stay useful, stay sweet, stay silent. But I was done being sweet. Done being a backup plan. That night, I placed the new will in the drawer Nino once called the vault. I tucked it beneath my birth certificate and passport. I poured myself a small glass of red wine, opened the window, and listened to the wind rush through the hills like an old friend, finally returning. No ceremony, no parade, just one decision, made in silence, sealed in ink, and waiting. The days after I changed the will passed like mist, silent, slow, and heavier than they appeared. Matteo didn't call, not even a message, which, I suppose, wasn't unusual, but the absence felt different now. Not a hole, but a choice I had made. One I was finally ready to live with. I didn't tell anyone. Not Sophia, not the priest I saw every Sunday, not even Morella from the market, who always asks if I'm feeling lonely up on the hill. I just moved through the days, like someone rearranging a house no one else would visit. I cleaned out drawers that had held the same batteries and loose buttons for 20 years. I threw away recipe clippings I'd never cooked and expired coupons for shops that had long closed. I even donated my wedding china to the church thrift box, knowing full well no one in my family would come asking for it. What do you call that? Grief? Closure? Maybe just release. Each evening, I'd sit by the window with my tea, watching the sun drag its orange skirts behind the mountains, and I'd wait for something to break the quiet, but nothing came. Not guilt, not regret, just a stillness I had never known. That was, until the letter arrived. It was shoved through the mail slot one Thursday morning while I was kneading dough for a fig tart. The envelope bore Matteo's firm handwriting, always too sharp, too calculated, no return address, just my name. I washed my hands and stared at it a long while, flour, dust clinging to my wrists. Part of me wanted to throw it in the fire, but something in the way it was sealed, uneven and clumsy, made me curious. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No greeting, just words. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to dismiss you that day. Work's been insane. I forgot your appointment. It wasn't personal, I've just had a lot on my plate. You didn't say anything after that, but you've seemed distant. I was thinking maybe Sunday we could have lunch. You could cook your lentils, I miss them. Let me know. Yamin. No signature, no warmth, just facts, delivered like a quarterly update. I stood there reading it again, one hand still hovering over the counter. What struck me most wasn't the apology, it was the phrasing. You've seemed distant, as if my silence had just recently begun. He hadn't seen how distant he had made me, slowly, over years of half-promises and quick exits. I set the letter down, washed the flour from my fingers, and folded the dough. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just pressed the figs into the crust with steady hands, the way I always had. He missed my lentils. That was the part he remembered. Not the morning I fainted in the garden, trying to pick basil for his favorite sauce. Not the week I went without heat, because the bank called about activity on the joint account he once insisted I open for convenience. But he remembered the lentils. By the time Sunday came, I hadn't replied to the letter. I hadn't sent a message, but I baked the tart anyway. I suppose I was still half hopeful. At noon, I set the table. Not formally, just enough to feel like something might still be sacred. The sun lit the tiled floor like gold dust. I placed the tart in the center, poured myself water and waited. 12:15, 12:30, 12:50. At 1 o'clock I wrapped the tart in foil and put it in the fridge. It wasn't bitterness that made me do it. It was clarity. At 2:30, my phone buzzed. Sorry, something came up. Next week? I didn't reply. I turned the phone face down and took my tea out to the terrace. The wind was picking up across the fields, clouds gathering in the distance, but the stone under my chair still held the warmth of sun. I folded my shawl around me, sipped, and let the silence wrap around me again. That night, I opened the drawer, not the one with the will, the one beside my bed, where I'd kept Nino's pocket watch and the rosary from our wedding. I took out a small notebook I hadn't touched in years. On the cover, faded gold letters still read Conti di Casa, house accounts. Inside were notes, numbers, birthdays, grocery totals, scribbles from years I had been too busy surviving to breathe. I turned to a fresh page. Wrote, Mateo remembers lentils, forgets presents, wants lunch, missed both. I underlined it once, not out of spite, but record, because some things deserve to be written down. Not to hurt, not to prove, just to remember. By the end of the week, I had decided I would tell Sophia, not about the will, not all at once, but something, because kindness deserved more than crumbs, and sometimes, you don't choose legacy, you choose recognition. The next time I saw Sophia, she was returning from the bakery with a bag tucked under one arm and a little scratch of flour on her cheek. She didn't notice it. Probably hadn't even realized she'd touched her face. That's the thing about real people. They forget their vanity when they're busy being useful. Signora Ricci, she called from the walkway, lifting the bag as if it were a prize ribbon. They had the cornetti you like today. I opened the gate, already smiling. Only if you let me pay this time. She rolled her eyes in that easy, familiar way. We'll argue about it inside. We sat at my small terrace table, under the lemon tree that hadn't borne fruit since Nino passed. Still, its leaves gave shade, and the pots near the steps bloomed with geraniums and thyme. There was comfort in what remained. As we sipped coffee and shared the warm pastries, I noticed the way she balanced the world, one hand on her phone to check her little brother's school messages, the other gently buttering the flaky roll in front of her. She reminded me of myself at her age. Less tired, perhaps, but with that same fire beneath the politeness. You know, I said after a while, I've been thinking about legacy. She looked up. That's a heavy word for breakfast. I smiled. Yes. Well, when you're my age, it arrives uninvited, like a relative who never calls ahead. She laughed, then grew quiet. Do you mean your shop? Or, more personal? Both. I sipped. Then I said, when my children were small, I used to label everything. Their coats, their notebooks, their socks. I wanted their names to follow them. I thought that was love. But now, I think maybe it's not whose name goes on what, it's who bothers to remember your name when there's nothing left to gain from it. Sophia looked at me the way only someone younger and still open to the world can. I remember yours, she said quietly. I reached across the table and touched her wrist, just once. Just enough. I know, I whispered. That's why I want to talk to you about something. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink away like people do when they're uncomfortable with age or mortality. She just nodded. I want to make sure, I continued, that what I leave behind goes to someone who values it, who sees me not as a relic, but as a woman who built something, even if it's not grand. She looked surprised, but not confused. You mean the house? I nodded, and the garden, and the account Nino and I built over 43 years of skipping vacations and fixing our own gutters. Sophia sat back, processing. Signora Ricci, that's... I'm not giving it to you now, I interrupted, smiling to ease her. I'm simply telling you because you deserve to know that someone sees you too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze shifted. A bird landed on the railing. The silence wasn't heavy, it was sacred. You don't have to decide anything now, I added. Sophia looked down at her plate, then back up at me. I never thought someone like you would even think of someone like me, she said. That sentence cracked something in me, like she had peeled the lid off years of invisibility in reverse. Someone like you, I repeated. You mean kind, attentive, capable of making an old woman feel human again? She gave a half smile. I mean someone who isn't part of the family. I leaned forward, steel in my gaze. Family is not defined by who shares your blood, it's who doesn't let your coffee go cold. She laughed through a tear, and I knew, somehow, that Nino would have liked her. Maybe even loved her. When she left that day, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen, and that, at 72, is rarer than gold. Tote. The next morning, I opened the terrace doors early. The sun was still low, crawling across the tiles like a welcome guest. I walked out barefoot, a cardigan wrapped around me, and looked over the valley. I hadn't heard from Mateo again. No second letter, no voice message, not even a lazy emoji to fill the space. And strangely, it no longer mattered. Because I was building something else now. Not a revenge, Not a punishment. A shift. A recalibration of what mattered. After lunch, I made a list on the back of a grocery receipt. Things I wanted to say before the world went quiet. That I used to sing arias while washing dishes. That Nino cried once, only once, when his brother died and he thought I was asleep. That my middle child's first word was not mama, but that I remember the smell of each of their hair when they were babies. I folded the list, tucked it into the same drawer as the new will, and felt something click into place. Not closure, but clarity. It was the following Friday when the silence finally broke. Mateo showed up without warning. I was pruning the rose bushes near the front gate when I heard the familiar whine of his tires crunching into the gravel. A part of me, an older, softer part, still lifted its head, like some fragile instinct, long trained to hope, had stirred again. But I didn't move quickly. I wiped my hands on my apron and clipped one more browning stem before turning toward the car. He stepped out, phone in hand, sunglasses still on even though the sun had already begun its descent. "Hey Ma," he said, as if we'd seen each other just yesterday. As if he hadn't disappeared into text messages and missed lunches for weeks. I nodded once. "Mateo." He looked around, as if scanning for something, maybe shame, maybe an audience. Finding neither, he put the phone in his pocket. "I've been meaning to stop by." I let that sentence hang in the air like laundry on a line with no clothespins. He took a step closer. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the terrace, leaving the gate open behind me. If he wanted to follow, he could. If not, the door would close by itself. He followed. We sat across from each other, no table between us this time, just the weight of unspoken things. "I wanted to apologize," he started, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve, "about the doctor's appointment. I handled it badly." "You ignored it," I said plainly. He blinked. "Yeah, that's what I mean." I waited. I was overwhelmed. The firm's been going through restructuring, and there's been talk about layoffs. I raised a hand, palm outward, like a traffic signal. "Mateo." He stopped. "I didn't call you here." He stiffened. "No, I just thought—" "I didn't invite you," I repeated, "and I'm not asking for your reasons. I've spent enough of my life understanding other people's justifications. I'm tired." He looked down, hands clasped in his lap. I studied him. The boy I once walked to school, the young man who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, the adult who now looked like a stranger, wearing my son's face. "Do you remember what Papa used to say about apologies?" I asked. He shook his head. "An apology is only useful if it arrives before resentment sets like cement," I recited. He tried to smile. "That sounds like him." "It does," I said. "And you missed that window." A silence bloomed, but it wasn't the old kind, not the quiet that cowers. This one stood tall. It made room for the next truth. "I came by because," Mateo began again, slower, this time, choosing his words like stones across a river. "There's been some banking confusion. The accountant said some authorizations have shifted. Your name is listed on everything now." "Correct," I said. He blinked. "Why?" I tilted my head slightly. "Because your father trusted me, and I stopped trusting you." His face froze. "I didn't take anything from you," I continued, voice even. "I simply reclaimed what was never yours to assume. You treated me like a figurehead, like a beloved mascot. But I am the architect of this home, Mateo. And architects don't need permission to redesign their foundations." He looked away toward the hills, maybe to avoid the sting of my stare, maybe because he had no more script left to follow. "I'm not here for money, Ma." "I know," I said. "You're here because you noticed the door doesn't open for you anymore. And now, suddenly, you want to knock." He looked back at me, jaw tense. "Are you cutting me out?" I already did. The words landed like the thud of a closed book. Nothing dramatic, but final. I stood slowly, letting my knees complain just enough to remind us both I was still human, still aging, still real. "Do you want coffee?" I asked. He looked startled. "What?" I said. "Do you want coffee?" Yeah, sure." I nodded and stepped inside. My hands moved automatically, grind, boil, pour, but my mind stayed in the garden, watching that boy man fidget like he used to before a school recital. I brought the cups out on a tray. He took his with both hands, like it might fall through his fingers. We didn't talk much after that. He drank in silence. I let the wind do the rest of the speaking. When he stood to leave, he didn't hug me, just nodded awkwardly and said, "I'll be in touch." I didn't reply. I watched him go, the tires whining again, a little more uncertain this time. Inside, I placed his half-empty cup in the sink and turned on the faucet. The water hissed. I felt steady, not victorious, not vindicated, just firm, like the cement Papa warned us about. I dried my hands, then went to the drawer with the notebook. I flipped to a fresh page. Entry: Matteo visit. Apology offered. Too late. Underlined once. Closed the cover, filed it away. Not for revenge, for memory. 2 days after Matteo's visit, I took down a photo from the hallway. It had hung there for 37 years, just outside the guest bathroom, slightly crooked. I'd straightened it every time I passed. Out of habit, out of reverence. It was the kind of picture you don't look at. You just know it's there. But now, I looked. It was the 5 of us, me, Nino, and the children, posed stiffly at the coast in Positano. Matteo was maybe 10, the others younger. I wore a blue dress that didn't fit quite right and had a damp patch from someone's spilled juice. Nino had his hand on my shoulder, not romantic, just grounding. The kind of touch that said, "You're not doing this alone." I took the frame down slowly. The dust outline on the wall was almost darker than the photo itself. I stared at the glass for a long time. Everyone in the image was younger than the ghosts I now lived with. Even me. I didn't take it down because I was angry. I took it down because I didn't recognize them anymore, or rather because they no longer recognized me. I wrapped the frame in a dish towel and placed it gently in a drawer beneath the linens. Not gone, not destroyed, just moved from visibility to memory. That same afternoon, I spent hours in the garden. The olive tree was still bare, stubborn. It hadn't flowered properly in 4 years, despite everything I tried: eggshells, compost, pruning. Nino used to joke it would bloom the day I finally yelled at someone. Well, I whispered to the bark, close enough. I watered it anyway, not because I expected a miracle, but because even stubborn things deserve care. Around 5, Sophia texted. I found a shop space near the pharmacy. Nothing fancy, but the kitchen's got real tile. Want to see it with me tomorrow? I smiled. My fingers hovered above the screen before I replied. Absolutely, I'll bring snacks. She responded with a heart emoji and a little flower bag icon. I hadn't known that emoji even existed. The next day, I wore real shoes. The leather ones with the low heel that used to be my shop owner's shoes. I tied my hair tighter, pinned back the flyaways, and applied lipstick matte, not glossy. For the first time in years, I looked like a woman who was going somewhere, not just fading from one room to the next. Sophia picked me up at 10 a.m. sharp. The shop was small, a former printer's office with yellowing walls and a cracked front window. But when she opened the back door and I saw the wide kitchen, I nearly cried. Not from beauty, but from potential. The stove was ancient, but the ventilation was solid. The tile was mismatched, but the floor felt steady underfoot. Sophia walked the room with purpose, describing where ovens would go, how shelving could line the back wall. She spoke with her hands, her voice rising when she said, "And here, maybe a little table by the window for customers who just want to breathe for a while." She stopped when she saw my eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. I'm just remembering the first time Nino showed me the flower shop. It was nothing then. Cracked windows, a leaky roof. But he said, if you can imagine it with your eyes closed, it's already yours. She smiled, soft. That's exactly how this feels. We walked the space in silence for a bit. I could see it now. Shelves with jars of lemon jam, baskets with rosemary crackers, cakes wrapped in brown paper and string. "You're really going to do this?" I asked. Her voice caught a little. "I want to. I've never had someone believe in me like this." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I had prepared. A check. Not everything, just enough to secure the space and begin. "This isn't charity," I said before she could protest. "This is foundation money. You build something real, and one day, maybe you'll help someone else do the same." She stared at it, then back at me. I saw the shake in her hands before she steadied them. I won't let you down, she whispered. I know, I said. Back home, I made lentils. Not for Matteo, for me. They were a little oversalted, but still good. The smell reminded me of rainy Sundays and ironed napkins, of childhoods I gave to people who forgot to say thank you. That night, I opened the will one more time, not to change anything, just to look at it. I ran my finger over Sophia's name. No fanfare, no trumpets, but it felt like peace. It came from a voice I hadn't expected, not Matteo, his wife. She called one morning, out of the blue, while I was folding laundry in the sunroom. The phone rang 3 times before I picked up, too long, probably, but I'd stopped rushing to answer things that didn't deserve urgency. Antonella, came her voice, clipped and sugary, like a tart with too much lemon peel. I think we need to talk. She didn't say mama. She hadn't in years. I said nothing. Let her stretch the silence like raw dough. It's just, she began again, her tone tightening. Things have shifted lately, financially. Matteo's been, well, you know how men are with pride. But I thought maybe we could have an honest conversation, woman to woman. I held the phone steady. Is Matteo there? No, she said quickly. He's at the office. This is just between us. That's when I knew she wasn't calling for kindness. She was calling because whatever Matteo had sugar-coated about the inheritance, or lack of it, was now falling apart under the weight of her assumptions. Go on, I said calmly. Well, it's come to our attention that some assets we thought were jointly designated are no longer accessible. Matteo didn't want to push. He said you'd been emotional lately. I told him we should give you time, but frankly, we can't afford more delays. Our son starts private school next year. There it was. The expectation. Polished like silver. I let her continue. Let her list the bills, the mortgage, the temporary hardship they were facing, and then the final straw. You're in a big house by yourself. Antonella, you don't drive much. You don't even use most of the rooms. It just seems inefficient. Like we're pouring resources into dead weight. My fingers curled around the edge of the counter. Dead weight. Not even said cruelly. Just carelessly. Like I was a couch no one had the courage to throw out yet. I took a breath. Let me tell you something, I said, voice low but firm. This house was built by hands that bled. It holds the echo of first steps, of night fevers, of meals stretched to feed 5 with pride. It may be quiet now, but it's not dead. And I am certainly not wait. A pause. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. It's just that. You meant it exactly like that. Her silence now. The kind that's not surrender, but exposure. I continued. I am not your safety net. I am not a retirement plan you didn't prepare, and I am not your background character. There was a gasp. The kind only people who've never been told no, know how to make. I lowered my voice even more. I changed the will not to hurt Matteo, but to protect what I spent a lifetime building. And you calling me to reclaim what was never yours to expect only confirms I made the right choice. Another pause, then defensively. So what? You're just cutting us off? No, I'm simply stepping out of the role of enabler. I wish you well. I hope you raise your child with love and grace. But don't raise them on entitlement. It ages poorly. Before she could answer, I ended the call. I stood there, heart steady, hands relaxed. No shaking, no doubt. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was defending my life like a piece of art, no longer on loan. I went back to folding my laundry. Later that afternoon, I took the old quilt out to the terrace. The one Nino's mother had stitched decades ago. Tiny green vines sewn into fading cream cloth. I laid it across the bench and sat with my tea, watching the wind turn the olive branches. It was astonishing, really, how quiet the world became when you stopped explaining yourself to people who were never listening. I thought of Sophia, probably sanding old shelves and wiping counters in her new space. I thought of Matteo's son, my grandson, who hadn't visited since Christmas 2 years ago, though I still mailed a card every birthday. And I thought of me. How many years I had blurred my outline to accommodate others. But not anymore. The sun moved past the lemon tree. The light slid slowly off the tiles, and I stayed there, still and whole, not waiting for anyone. That evening, I prepared dinner for one. Fresh tomatoes, garlic toasted in olive oil. No one to complain it was too simple. No one to ask for more salt. I poured a glass of wine, set one plate, and lit a single candle. Not for romance, for ceremony. Because surviving this long deserves it. The next morning, I retrieved a box from the top shelf of my wardrobe. Inside it, my oldest ledger book. The cover was warped from decades of damp kitchens and nervous palms. It smelled of paper and lavender, and the pages had yellowed so softly they looked like memories. This was not the ledger for bank records or household costs. This was the one I had kept since 1974. The one where I recorded every act that felt like something sacred, a kindness, a betrayal, a debt of gratitude, or a silence too heavy to be ignored. Most people write diaries for feelings. I wrote ledgers for facts, what people gave, and what they took. Not for bitterness, for truth. I turned the pages carefully. My own handwriting shifted styles through the decades, from the tight loops of a young bride to the shaky underlines from the year Nino passed. Each page held entries with names and dates and simple lines. In 1979, Mirella brought oranges when I was sick. Refused to leave until I ate one. 1984, Matteo cried when I forgot to bring lunch to school. Told me he forgave me. 203, Julia, his wife, did not thank me for watching the baby overnight. Said, well, that's what grandmothers are for, and so on. On the last page, I wrote a new line, 2025. Antonella remembered herself. Finally, I closed the book, filed it back under the scarf drawer. Sometimes, it's not revenge that's needed, just record-keeping. Due. Later that day, Sophia arrived with a box of broken tiles and a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in newspaper. I brought pieces for the counter, she said. Figured I could test which ones fit. Might do a mosaic backsplash. I smiled. The best things in life are mosaics. She looked confused. Fragments that shouldn't fit together, I explained. But somehow do, and they hold. She laughed and set to work. I watched her for a while. The way her brow furrowed in concentration. The way she hummed off-key, without care as she arranged and rearranged the colored shards. Then, gently, I said, may I ask a question? She paused and nodded. If you succeed, if your shop grows and people line up outside for your jam and tartlets, what will you do with it all? She looked at me, puzzled. I mean, I continued, what will you do when it's not just about survival anymore? Sophia blinked slowly. I've never really thought past surviving. I think past it now, I said. Just once. She leaned against the edge of the counter and crossed her arms, the way young people do when they're trying to appear steady. I'd hire my sister, she said, eventually. She's studying hospitality, but doesn't think she's good enough. I'd give her the front of house. I smiled. That's a start. I'd teach the neighborhood kids to bake, the ones whose parents work late. I'd make it a safe place. There it is, I said quietly. What? Legacy. She looked down, then back up. You're really giving all of this to me? I nodded. Not because you earned it, but because you honored it. We spent the afternoon planting lemon balm in an old ceramic pot. The scent lingered on our hands as we washed up. Later, after Sophia left, I brought the pot out to the terrace and placed it beside the olive tree. They didn't match. One was ancient and slow, the other fresh and unruly. But somehow, they belonged side by side. That evening, I cooked again. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I peeled a single clove of garlic and remembered how Nino used to insist I was too rough with the blade. You're not making war, he'd tease. You're coaxing flavor. I smiled and cooked slowly. A meal for one. Yes, but made like it was for company. When I sat down to eat, I noticed the fading sunlight had cast my shadow across the kitchen wall. It looked solid, not ghostly. And that, to me, was progress. At around 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. Rare. At that hour. I opened it to find a courier standing sheepishly, a small envelope in hand. From your son, he said. He asked me to deliver it, in person. I nodded and took it. Inside was a handwritten letter, no signature, just his initials. But the writing was familiar, tired, and more slanted than before. Mama, I told Julia you weren't changing the will. I lied. She found out. She said things I didn't agree with. She called you things I didn't agree with. But I didn't stop her either, and I realized that silence makes me guilty too. I don't want the money, but I do want to understand how we got here. If you're willing. If you ever are. Mateo. I folded it slowly, placed it in the drawer with the others, not to forget, to file under possible reconciliation, to be evaluated later. Not all bridges must be burned. Some just need locks added to their gates. The letter from Mateo stayed on the kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't rush to respond. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to consider what response actually meant. Was it permission, surrender, or simply an opening I no longer owed? Each time I passed it between watering the basil and reheating lentils, I felt its quiet throb, like a wound I thought had healed but still flinched when pressed. On the 4th morning, I placed a clean napkin over it, not to hide it, but to say, not yet. Instead, I pulled out the wooden box Nino had carved when we were first married. It once held his cufflinks and wedding watch. Now it stored letters. Not from him, from me, to him. I had written dozens since his passing. Never sent, never read aloud, just folded confessions and scribbled updates written on market receipts or torn notebook pages. That morning, I added another. Nino, your son wrote to me. Not asking for anything. Just clarity. Maybe that's something. Maybe it's nothing. I don't know if I'm strong or just old enough to stop needing to be liked. Either way, I'm breathing better. Sophia found a space. She's painting the shelves this week. You'd like her. She listens without planning what to say next. I made your anchovy pasta last night. It was too salty, but the kitchen smelled like you for an hour. That was enough. Love. Ian. I folded the letter, placed it on top of the stack, and closed the lid. Some stories aren't for resolution. They're for honoring. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something curiosity, maybe one. Antonella Ricci, a young voice asked. Yes? This is Clara. I'm your grandson's teacher. My heart skipped. Is everything all right? Oh yes, he's fine. It's just he wrote something today in class. A short essay. The topic was someone I miss. I thought you might like to hear what he said. I sat down slowly. She read, I miss my Nana. She smells like tomatoes and soap. She makes the best fig cookies, even when she says she's tired. I haven't seen her because grown-ups are fighting. I don't know what about, but I think they forgot she's a person too. I didn't forget. I closed my eyes. The teacher paused. I hope I wasn't out of line. It felt like something you should know. No, I whispered. Thank you. After we hung up, I walked out to the terrace, the cold tiles pressing into my feet like a truth I hadn't wanted to feel. I sat by the olive tree. The pot of lemon balm beside it had sprouted 2 new leaves. Maybe that was what love looked like. Small, defiant growth, where you least expected it. I looked up at the hills, then back down at my hands. They were not elegant hands. They were not the hands of a mother in perfume commercials. They were browned and lined and full of history, but they were still mine. That night, I made cookies. Not because anyone would come, but because I needed to smell like fig and soap again. The next day, Sophia arrived with paint on her cheeks and news in her eyes. I got the loan, she beamed. Only a small one, but enough for the oven and signage. I clapped once. That's wonderful. She pulled out a folder from her bag. I want to name the place Antonella's. You okay with that? I blinked. My name? You gave me the start, the recipes, the belief. Why not? I smiled, slowly. Then I insist we write the full name. Antonella Ricci's. Not because it's mine, because it means something. She nodded, and I saw a tear she didn't let fall. Later, we tested jam labels at my table. Lemon ginger, blood orange, pear with rosemary. Each name was printed in fine script, but in the corner of every one, in small handwritten font, inspired by A. Ricci. When she left that evening, I sat back and stared at the door. No one else had ever named anything after me. I'd fed mouths, paid debts, patched clothes, but always in silence. And now, suddenly, I was ink. That night, I opened the drawer where Mateo's letter still rested beneath the napkin. I took it out, smoothed the folds, Then I did something I didn't expect. I wrote him back. Matteo, I read your note. I appreciate your honesty. Understanding doesn't come all at once. It's built, not begged for. If you ever want to talk, truly talk without expectation, my door is open, but I will no longer enter conversations where my value is negotiable. If you can accept that, you're welcome to visit. Your mother, Antonella Ricci. I sealed it, but I didn't send it that night. I needed one more morning of peace first. Just one. The next morning began with soft clouds and a sharper wind than usual. It wasn't unfriendly weather, just honest, the kind of air that reminded you what season it really was, whether you were ready or not. I wore a thicker cardigan and wrapped a scarf loosely around my neck before heading into town with Sophia. She'd invited me to see the progress on the shop. Real progress, she had said. Not just sanding and hope. The shop had changed. The cracked window was replaced with clean glass. The walls, once dull yellow, were now a warm cream. The old signage had been removed, leaving only the metal hooks where the new one would soon hang. But it wasn't until I stepped through the door that I felt it in my chest. It smelled like lemon zest and paint. And home. The kitchen tiles had been scrubbed to their original blue. A new oven gleamed in the corner. In the front of the store, a small chalkboard rested on a wooden easel with the words, Antonella Ricci's Preserves, Stories and Warm Things. I blinked. Is it too much? Sophia asked gently. I shook my head. It's exactly right. She gave me a tour of the shelves that were now filled with carefully labeled jars, fig and honey, rosemary tomato, lemon lavender. A small table near the window held a linen cloth, a ceramic teapot, and two mismatched chairs. You said once, some people just want a place to breathe, she reminded me. And you gave them one, I said. She opened a drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a box. Inside were thank you notes from early customers and handwritten recipes I'd passed her. She placed the box in my hands. This is yours. I traced my finger along the edge of the paper. I've never had my name on anything, I said quietly. Sophia tilted her head. That's not true. Your name's on me. On how I move. On how I trust. That counts. I sat in one of the chairs and let the sunlight touch my cheeks. Maybe I hadn't needed a plaque. Maybe I had already been written into people without knowing it. Think. That afternoon, after Sophia dropped me home, I walked around the house with fresh eyes. I noticed the scuffs on the baseboards, the missing handle on the pantry door, the small crack in the tile near the stove. Years ago I would have felt shame. Now, I just saw evidence. This house had lived. That was enough. I took the envelope with Matteo's reply, the one I had sealed but not yet sent, and placed it near the mailbox. I didn't flag the courier. I just left it there, like something that might happen, but didn't have to. I'd offered a door. Whether he stepped through it was not my burden to carry. That evening, I pulled the curtains earlier than usual, not because I was hiding from the world, but because for once I was full before nightfall. I made soup, fennel, potato, and leek, the kind of soup Nino loved, but Matteo had once called peasant food. I never corrected him, but now I would have said, exactly, and peasants know how to make a meal last for 3 generations. As it simmered, I lit a single candle. Not out of grief, not out of habit, just because. I ate with no noise except the clink of the spoon against the bowl. When I finished, I rinsed everything slowly and left it on the drying rack. Then I did something unexpected. I wrote a new will. Not because I'd changed my mind, but because I wanted to write it myself. The last one had been drafted through lawyers, efficient, clean, cold. This one was warm. It was written on thick paper, in pen, and with intention. I still left the house to Sophia, the shop, the money and savings, but I also left things I had never considered before. My recipe journal, with annotations and stains. My wedding ring, to be buried in the garden by the olive tree, as requested. A note for Matteo, unopened until I was gone, titled, If You Still Wonder, and then, one more line. To whoever reads this, I was not invisible. I simply waited until the noise cleared. I folded the document and placed it in the ledger box. Not legal. Maybe, but true. And truth, I had learned, outlives paperwork. Recently, as I stepped outside to close the shutters, I noticed the lemon balm had flowered. Small, pale purple blooms that hadn't been there the day before. I crouched slowly, touched one with the tip of my finger. Thank you, I whispered. I don't know if I was talking to the plant, or the moment, or myself. Maybe all three. The doorbell rang the next morning while I was still drying my hair. It was early. Too early for deliveries, too early for Sophia, and far too early for anyone with polite intentions. I didn't rush to the door. I finished what I was doing, wrapped my damp hair into a loose bun, slid on my house shoes, and tied the belt of my cardigan just tight enough to remind myself, you are still in control. When I opened the door, I froze. It was Matteo. He stood on the step, shoulders hunched, holding a paper bag that looked too light to matter and too heavy to ignore. We stared at each other for a long moment. His eyes had changed. They looked like his father's in winter, less sharp, more aware of their own weight. Hi, Mama. I nodded but didn't step aside. You came. He glanced at the ground. I wasn't sure I should. And yet you did. I didn't come for anything, he said quickly. I've been thinking about your letter, about Nana, about how I haven't really seen you in years. I stepped aside then. Come in. I made coffee. Inside, the house was filled with the soft scent of citrus peel and clean linen. He sat at the kitchen table like it was foreign terrain. His hand hovered over the chair before sitting. I placed a ceramic cup in front of him. No sugar, just how he used to take it. Do you remember, I said, the first time I let you carry a tray at the flower shop? He looked up. You were terrified. I was. You pretended not to be, he added. I nodded. That's what mothers do. He held the cup with both hands, but didn't sip. I didn't realize I stopped asking how you were. I only noticed you when I needed something. And when I didn't need you anymore. Acted like I didn't exist? He flinched. Yes. There was no apology yet, but there was truth. And sometimes, that was the harder gift to give. He pulled the paper bag closer and opened it. Inside was a small notebook, worn leather, no label. I found this in one of Dad's old boxes, he said. It's his. I took it gently and opened to the first page. Nino's handwriting, slanted and small, with his classic blue ink. Recipes, notes, quotes, even grocery lists with little hearts next to items like tonno and vino buono. I ran my fingers over the pages. He kept this all? Looks like he was planning to write something. A book, maybe, or a record of your life together. It starts in a date I knew too well. The miscarriage, I whispered. Matteo looked up sharply. You remember? I remember every day I carried a child, even the ones who never made it to light. He was quiet, for a long time. Then finally, I never asked about that. No. You didn't. He leaned back in his chair. I think I was afraid of how much I didn't know you. I looked at him fully then. Not as my son, but as a man, flawed, older, and finally still enough to be real. I never needed you to know everything, I said, but I needed you to act like you wanted to. He nodded. It wasn't an apology, it was acceptance. And somehow, that landed softer. After he left, I sat at the table alone and opened Nino's notebook to a random page. Antonella thinks she's ordinary. I hope someday she understands that quiet love builds entire cities. I read it 3 times before closing the cover, not because I was done with it, but because I finally believed him. That afternoon, Sophia arrived with 3 jars of jam and a huge grin. You won't believe it, she said breathlessly. There's a food writer coming to visit. One of those regional bloggers wants to interview me for a piece on local revival shops. I smiled wide. Did you tell her about your secret weapon? She laughed. Of course. I said the jam's good, but the ghosts in the recipes are better. We sat in the sunroom, jam between us on a plate with thin crackers and slices of pear. I watched her pour tea and speak with her hands. She was growing into her role, not just as a shopkeeper, but as a legacy holder. That's a different kind of woman. One who knows history isn't a burden. It's a blueprint. Before she left, I gave her the notebook. I want you to have it. She blinked. Are you sure? It's not just mine anymore. It never was. She clutched it like something sacred. I walked her to the door. As she turned back down the path, she called, Will you come tomorrow? Be there for the article? I paused, then nodded. Yes. That night, I pulled the last of the fresh sheets from the line and folded them slowly. The scent of sun-soaked fabric filled the kitchen. I set one on the guest bed, just in case. Not for Matteo, not for anyone specific, just in case a moment arrived that needed softness. I lit a candle. And this time, I didn't feel the need to write anything. Some evenings are meant to be quiet, because quiet is a language too. The next morning was crisp, the air carrying that faint scent of stone and lemon trees, still wet from dew. I woke early, not from habit, but from a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Readiness. I chose my clothes with care. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because today deserved intention. A long charcoal skirt, soft at the hem. A clean white blouse. And of course, my dark green cardigan, threadbare now at the sleeves but still holding its shape. I pinned my bun tighter than usual, let the wispy flyaways frame my face just enough. Then, at the last minute, I added Nino's watch to my wrist. Still ticking, still faithful. I walked to the shop. Not far, maybe 10 minutes downhill, but every step felt like a soft kind of procession. By the time I arrived, the small sidewalk was already scattered with curious glances. Sophia stood outside beneath the hanging sign, brushing flour from her sleeves and directing someone where to place a flour bucket. When she saw me, her whole face changed. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She simply stepped forward and took my hand. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "Let's open the door." She turned the brass handle. We entered together. Meager. The interior smelled like sugar, citrus, and old pin wood warmed by sunlight. The jars gleamed like stained glass. The floor had been swept into tidy spirals of dust in the corners, proof that someone had cleaned without erasing the soul of the place. A journalist waited at the back table, young, with a camera looped around her neck and a notepad already open. Sophia introduced us. "This is Antonella Ricci." I offered my hand. The girl looked startled for a moment, like meeting a name she thought was only an idea. "I've been hearing about you since I got off the train," she said. "Your jam recipes have a legacy around here." I smiled. "Recipes are just memories you can eat." She laughed and scribbled it down. The interview started with Sophia, but quickly shifted between us like an old dance. I told the girl about lemon balm and rosemary jam, about the best way to candy orange peel without bitterness, and how recipes were rarely about the ingredients, but about who you fed and why. Then came the final question. "What does it feel like," she asked, "to see your name above a door?" I paused. Sophia watched me closely. "I thought it would feel like arrival," I said. "But it doesn't. It feels like return." The girl smiled softly and closed her notebook. When she left, more customers arrived. A trickle at first, neighbors, familiar faces, a curious tourist or two. By noon, the shop was full. I moved behind the counter instinctively, tying on an apron that didn't quite fit anymore. My hands found jars without labels, passed out slices of pear jam on rye crisps, poured tiny cups of herbal tea. I wasn't performing. I was returning to muscle memory, the quiet strength of being useful, without asking to be seen. At some point, I looked up and saw Matteo standing in the doorway. No Julia, no child. Just him, holding a single wrapped bouquet of olive branches and wildflowers. We locked eyes. He didn't step forward. He just nodded once, held up the bouquet gently, and placed it in the small wooden box beside the door marked offerings and memories. Then he turned and left. Sophia saw, but didn't speak. Instead, she moved beside me and whispered, "We're sold out of the fig." I smiled. "Of course we are." Yeah. After the last customer left, we cleaned slowly. Sophia hummed something tuneless and soft. I wiped the counters, letting the silence settle in like steam after a good boil. She turned toward me with tired joy. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. I thought about it. Not the money, not the will, not even Matteo. "No," I said, "not anymore. I was afraid you'd feel guilty for keeping this place instead of, letting it go for people who never carried it?" I asked. "No, the only thing I regret is how long it took me to realize I could choose." She smiled. "You chose well." I looked around. The jars, the shelves, the little chalkboard that now read, "Sold out of fig. More coming soon. Love." And in the center of it all, a wooden stool where I had stood all day, no longer invisible. I did, I whispered. As we locked up, the last of the light poured through the window, turning the glass jars gold. I stepped outside and looked at the sign again, not out of pride, out of quiet affirmation. Antonella Ricci's. For the first time in decades, my name was not behind anything. It was ahead. I woke early the next morning, even before the birds began their low chatter outside my window. The house felt different. Not emptier. Not fuller. Just balanced. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out toward the terrace. The olive tree swayed gently in the morning breeze, its leaves silvered by dew. Next to it, the lemon balm had grown taller, almost reaching the first rung of the trellis. I made coffee slowly, one spoonful, then another. And as it brewed, I opened the drawer beside the stove and pulled out the final envelope, the one I had labeled in my own handwriting, to be opened when everything has been said. I unfolded the letter and read it again. Not for changes, for certainty, to whoever comes next. This house has stood on tired bones and good bread. It has heard too many silences and too few thank yous. That's not a complaint, that's just a record. If you are reading this, it means I have chosen to leave without performance, without final warnings or final dinners. I simply stepped out of the frame. I want you to know I did not live a perfect life, but I lived an observant one. I saw everything. I remembered more than anyone assumed. And in the end, I chose what to carry forward and what to set down. With kindness. Antonella Ricci. I folded it again, tucked it inside the hollow of my old ledger book. Not for drama, for order. That afternoon, I visited Sophia's shop. Not to work, not to be seen, just to sit by the window with a slice of tart and a tea I didn't have to make. Sophia was in the back, rolling dough. She gave me a nod through the open kitchen door, the kind of nod that says I see you without interrupting what matters. I looked around. A boy about 10 sat with his mother, slowly tasting a spoonful of plum preserve. His eyes lit up. His mother smiled. Across the room, a couple I didn't recognize were taking photos of the jam jars. My name was everywhere, and yet the room wasn't about me anymore. That was the beauty of legacy. It doesn't cling. It lets go, and still remains. Sophia joined me with a cup of her own. No apron today, she teased. I smiled. I retired. For the second time this month, she laughed. We sat in warm silence for a while. Then I asked, have you thought about what happens after this? After what? After the article. After the first winter. After the shop becomes normal. She nodded, slowly. I want to host workshops, cooking classes, a place for people to bring their stories and turn them into something edible. Good, I said. Feed them, but also teach them how to feed themselves. Sophia leaned her head on my shoulder, just briefly. You're not going anywhere, are you? I didn't answer, with words. Some answers are better left in the way you stay seated, or in the way you refill someone's tea, without asking. That evening, I took a walk. Not far, just down to the foot of the hill and back. The streets glowed with late sunlight, the kind that makes every stone look older and every breath feel earned. At the corner, I passed a wall where someone had painted, "Quiet women still leave loud echoes." I traced the phrase with my finger. Then, I smiled and walked on. At home, I took down the last of the framed photos from the hallway, not to erase, to update. I placed a new photo at the center, Sophia and me in front of the shop, just before the soft opening, her apron crooked, my hands on her shoulders, both of us squinting at the sun. I looked at the empty space beside it and thought of Matteo. No photo yet, but the space was there. That too was love. I spent the evening organizing recipes, labeling spices, filing every letter by year, not by feeling. Some people leave chaos when they go. I wanted to leave structure. It's not cold, it's considerate. Before bed, I lit one last candle and opened Nino's notebook. Inside, pressed between the final pages, was a leaf from our old fig tree. I tucked it there decades ago and forgot. It was browned and papery, but intact. I placed it beside the window and whispered, "Tomorrow, we plant." Not a metaphor, just the truth. The next morning, Sophia and I went to the garden behind the shop. She carried the pot. I carried the notebook. We dug a small hole beneath the kitchen window, the one that caught the best light in the afternoon. I pressed the seed into the soil, watered it, smoothed the dirt over with the palm of my hand. Fig tree, she asked. I nodded. It won't grow fast, but when it does, it stays. We stood there a while longer. The sun rose higher, people began to arrive, and I turned to the door. My door, still open.